Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Jewish Divorce Project. I'm your host, Noam Rauscher.
And I'm your host, Liron Tal.
Join us as we kvetch
and kvel about Judaism and divorce from our perspective as two Jewish professionals and two divorce coaches.
And two Jewish parents with lots of experience and plenty of opinions.
Yeah, we can chat when we start a little bit.
Oh, that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to get us
going.
Are
we starting? Okay.
So how was Passover?
Oh, okay. Are we starting? Okay, hello.
Sorry to catch you off guard.
I didn't know you weren't like, we're starting, let's go. I was like, okay. All right. Yeah, Passover was great. It was, a different vibe this year for sure. We did the whole, put out an extra chair in behalf, in honoring the hostages. We talked a little bit more about the situation. My kids were there, so we didn't get too deep. The family, there was a little bit of a more somber feeling going on, but we really just focused on being together and being blessed that we're all together.
Yeah, we were kind of in the midst of everything, like preparing for the Seder, getting everything set, and then also just reading the news and watching everything unfold on the college campuses was just, it made us want to appreciate what was going on just a little bit more. We felt, so sensitively towards all these college students that were, just getting engaged in all this stuff. And especially Jewish students feeling harassed and everything like that, and the rise of anti-Semitism on campuses. And in some way like that, it made the mood a little somber, but it also made us a little bit more willing to kind of appreciate the current moment a little bit more, which was just our family inside this nice little bubble. And that felt really good to actually just joy together and not have to worry about current events.
Yeah. And then we went away. We did a nice little family trip. It was my dad's 70th birthday, and he didn't want to do a party. He just wanted to take
you guys
the kids and the grandkids. And we went to the Terra Resort. It's like one of the top resorts in the country. We felt so
really
pampered.
Nice.
It was amazing. And it was just so nice to have that time where everybody's not working and to see all the kids getting to have those intimate moments with their grandparents, with their aunts and uncles. And my favorite part was my sister-in-law and I at the pool were just sitting there with pina coladas, and my brother and my parents were hanging out with all the kids. Anytime the kids came up to us, my grandma would be like, they're on vacation, leave them alone. So
give them some chance to breathe.
It was a nice little mommy break.
That really is nice. Do you ever
my niece is 3, so her mom definitely needed a break.
When you travel with your boys and you travel alone, do you ever get super frustrated just because you're a parent traveling alone with your kids?
I used to. They're old enough now that I actually really enjoy traveling with them. They're 14 and 10. It's a lot easier, I think. And no, I don't get frustrated. I think there's moments where it's it'd be nice to have another adult to, talk to, or go down to if we're at a hotel and go down to the hotel bar or something like that, but I do travel with friends, and I travel with my parents. And when I go camping, I usually have other people there as well. So no, it doesn't really feel missing for me. I actually have such negative memories of all the fights we used to have when we would go to trips, and how I'd be mad that I was doing everything. And, I was doing all the stuff preparing, and there was so much resentment on our trips in a sense that it's almost easier now that I still doing as much as I did before, but I don't have any resentment towards anyone.
I hear that.
I guess.
It's so funny. I don't have the resentment, but I definitely get frustrated because I'm doing this all alone. And sometimes there's just a lot of work that's involved, right? It's not only the buying the tickets and the packing the bags and making sure that the kids are ready and that they've got all their stuff. Yeah. And then I've got it down to a science. It's a little bit easier now. I love that I can rely on family. I do laundry midway through, so I only bring so much clothing with me. So it's, there's a nice kind of balance that I've worked out with packing, but just in general, everything that needs to go into it, right? I realize the emotional and domestic labor exhaustion from it all, just having to think about everything. Will they have enough battery power in their iPads? Will there be internet connection on the plane for their iPads? Will they even be able to download movies and do all that stuff? And just all the exponential questions that come with it. like it just leads to a real deal of exhaustion for me. And so I can imagine for other single parents, it's there too. And yet there's also like being with family makes it more relaxing because they're willing to take the kids. And so it's, it
Yeah.
becomes a little bit easier. And I wanted to share, like, I had this great conversation with my sister. She and I last Passover, at least two Passovers ago, we were at her place and we were eating leftovers. And one night Judah asked, my eldest, he asked, do you guys parent differently or the same way as your parents? Right? Is there anything you learned from your parents about parenting that you do? And my sister and I were just like shocked at the question to begin with.
Hmm.
But then, and she let me go first. And I said, I think that's the reason why, like, I say I love you and I'm proud of you so much to my kids. Like I just say it all the time. And for obviously good reasons, right? Like there and I give them reasons behind it. And then I also say just because, right? I love you and I'm proud of you just because.
Hmm.
You're my kid. Uh, you know, and I said I think the reason I say that is because while I got those things from my parents, I didn't get enough. Like I always wanted more. Um, but I got it from my parents. But the reason why I say it to my kids so often is because I don't want them to feel like they should want for it more, that they're not getting enough from it, of it from me. And my sister grabbed my arm as soon as I said that. And she said, I do exactly the same thing for exactly the same
Oh,
reason. And that was like on
wow.
my mind for at least a year. And I had to go and talk to her about it because I felt like it was a real opportunity for us to connect. Um, and and it really was. It was very tearful, at least on my part, starting it off because I still have like this really kind of wonderful euphoric feeling from the bar mitzvah still of my family coming out to California, everyone coming out to celebrate with us. And I think somewhere in the back of my mind, I thought that they wouldn't, not because they hate me or I hate them or anything or there's bad blood, but just because like it's a schlep, right? And I guess I just had that
Hmm.
fear. But I said to her, I just told her how much I loved her and also said that like, in the past when we were kids, we didn't get along. And I think for obvious reasons, not because like either one of us is much of an asshole, but because there's sibling rivalry. And,
Hmm.
there are four kids in my family. And my parents worked really hard. I think we were all wanting of things and especially knowing how she felt about the pride and the love thing, right? And those feeling like a scarcity, you can understand why, maybe she and I would butt heads as being the two middle children of the family. And so I was just very direct with her and said like we didn't get along when we were growing up. I think that's just kids stuff. I certainly hope it's just kids stuff. But I wanted you to know that I love you and you're my sister and I'll always be there for you and all that stuff. And that was really important to get out this year more so than any other year, I think.
Oh,
Um,
that's beautiful.
Especially in light of like, what was discussed the previous Passover with my son's question and just, the bar mitzvah and all that stuff. So it became like a really wonderful Passover. It really did.
That's awesome. I actually also really cherished some time I got to have with my brother. I only have one brother that's 8 years younger than me. We're in very different places in our lives. I mean, he has a little one, he's starting out his family. And we've had throughout the years times that we've been connected, times that we haven't, just
Yeah.
based on, I mean, when he was 8 years old and I was 16, I couldn't stand his guts. But, we had different times. And it was just so nice to be able to really find that time to connect and just be together. And we stayed up late talking. It was just so special. And I think I just really cherish the sibling relationship even more so after going through a divorce. I mean, seeing
Right.
I take it so seriously that my boys stay close and connected. And I remind them, like, when they start being assholes to each other, I'm like, you guys are the only two that are going through this experience fully together. You
Right.
know what it's like at dad's, you know what it's like at mom's. So when my little one's having a hard time there, I'm always like texting my older one, like, I don't want to put the burden on him, but I'm kind of like, you got to help him out. Like you have to be there for each other. And so yeah, I think in general, it just kind of reminds you that importance of the relationship with your sibling, because when it comes to your parents, who knows what's going to happen?
Well, that was part of the context of which I said to her, I was like whispering, they're not going
Yeah.
to be around too much longer, whatever that looks like, maybe that's
Or
just
whether the
me.
parents split up and that changes your
Right.
dynamic.
Right.
Like brothers and sisters, siblings don't divorce, they don't split up.
Right.
So
Right. Right. And the
yeah.
necessity of having those sibling bonds. That's
Hmm.
what I try to tell my boys as well. So I'm glad. Yeah, I'm really glad that I was able to do that. I feel I feel a much better sense of integrity actually about my sibling relationships in that way, that they can always grow and evolve. But, having that conversation with my sister was really helpful in that way. And feel like I have a little bit more credence to say those things again to my kids, like you're saying, right? Like your siblings are really
Hmm.
the only ones who will recall this experience with you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And be
Yeah.
honest with
That's
you
so
about it,
sweet.
right? Or, as much so from their perspective. Is there
Absolutely.
any, just out of curiosity, is there any interfaith relationships in your marriage or in your family?
In my family, well, my brother's wife is not Jewish.
Uh-huh.
She is has a Chinese and Hawaiian background.
Right.
So definitely a different background. She has been committed to raising the kids Jewish. She has not converted. They were actually about to go through the whole conversion process in a class and then do the wedding, and then COVID happened. And so they kind of just, everything went on hold. They ended up just having a baby.
Right.
And so I think they're still planning on doing the wedding. But, I know it's important to my grandma, and, she's does all the Jewish holidays with us, and she's even learning Hebrew. And yeah, that's our only. And oh, and then my cousin, who we're really close with, she also married someone not Jewish, but he did convert um before they got married.
Right. Right. I
But
don't think
that's about it.
there's no interfaith family relationships in my family. My brother-in-law wasn't Jewish, but then he converted before the wedding and everything like that. But I don't think we have any interfaith relationships. But that's really
And
the
I
this
know before us, I mean, my brother did the DNA 23andMe, and he came out 100% Ashkenazi Jew.
uh-huh. Gotcha.
So I don't think there was any before us either.
Okay. Well, whatever. If people are checking their DNA, maybe that's just a better way of really understanding themselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Does it
Yeah.
actually say Ashkenazi? Does it say like,
Oh yeah, Ashkenazi
oh my gosh,
Jewish, and 100%. So
I gotta do
yeah,
23andMe. I gotta find out what I'm made of.
he kind of stopped the pattern. I mean, I did too, in the sense that the children's father is Israeli, but not he's like half Sephardic, Ashkenazi. So we kind of broke the pattern there between the two of us.
That's
We
so now you
broke
have a
their
really colorful
their
DNA.
100% record.
Right. Well, I'm glad that we're talking about, or at least we're teasing it a little bit because we have a wonderful guest coming up, Rabbi Ari Saks. Why don't we admit him to our conversation, and then we'll begin our conversation with him. It's about interfaith. Can interfaith marriage spell doom and divorce for your marriage?
Right.
How's it going, Ari?
It's going well, Noam. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Ari, this is Liron. Liron, this is Ari.
Hi,
Hi,
Leroy. Nice to meet
Ari.
you.
Nice to meet you
Hi.
too. Thank you for being here.
It is my pleasure, an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on your show and to hopefully add some value to your listeners, as I know that you definitely will have a lot to offer to some of ours as well. And I will say as well, Leon, I've been hearing your voice in hearing some of the episodes in order to kind of get ready for today. And I love the new format. I wish you can bring back the 70s theme from the first like 60 episodes. That
Oh,
music really got me going.
you're
I
talking
love the
about the theme
profession.
music, the
I love
intro
the
music.
yeah, I love the professional music. It's like feels a little more podcasty, but I definitely miss that 70s theme. I was like, okay, it's taking me on a trip.
Well, that's what we were doing. Thank you, Ari. I appreciate that. The 70s music was from the really kind of homegrown era when the podcast first
Right.
got started, and we went much more professional when Liron came on and started using a real producer. And now we're trying to figure out how to pay for it all. So that's kind of why
That's
we've
always a
gone
thing.
back to our grassroots movements. So if anyone
Yeah.
wants to sponsor us, we'd love to hear from you. We'll give you some time on the podcast for maybe an interview or a commercial or something like that. But thank you, Ari. Really appreciate it. It's good to see
My
you.
pleasure. Happy to be here today.
Happy to have you. Why don't we read your bio and then we'll get into
Sure.
the conversation? Yeah.
Sounds good.
All right. Rabbi Ari Saks recently completed an 11-year career as a full-time pulpit rabbi, with stops at Beth Mordechai in Perth Amboy and the Huntington Jewish Center on Long Island. During these years, he served as president of the Rabbinical Association in the heart of New Jersey and as deputy commander of the Perth Amboy Police Chaplain Corps. That's a cool title. Rabbi Saks completed fellowships with Klals, Rabbis Without Borders program, and 18 Doors Rukun Rabbinic Fellowship for Interfaith Family Outreach. Currently, Rabbi Saks is focusing his efforts on reaching out to interfaith families, primarily through his recently launched podcast, Interfaithing: Why Families Can Embrace Two Faiths Under One Roof. The podcast can be found on all podcast platforms. Rabbi Saks is also developing unique online adult education curricula, including Torah teachings for Jewish grandparents of interfaith families and how Israel should be taught in college campuses, both very worthwhile topics for today. Finally, Rabbi Saks serves Torah Yisrael, a conservative congregation in Rhode Island, on a part-time basis and serves pastoral needs for unaffiliated families in the Philadelphia area. Rabbi Saks received smicha, an MA in Jewish education, and a BA in Bible from the Jewish Theological Seminary, and a BA from Columbia University in Middle East and Asian languages and cultures. He lives in Philadelphia with his wife, Rachel, and his two beautiful children, Jonah and Lila. Rabbi Ari Saks, it's great to have you here on the Jewish Divorce Project. Thank you for joining us today.
It is my pleasure. And I know that sometimes when it comes to divorce, you often have to choose certain members of the family that you would want to spend more time with than the other, but also that when you get to know people's family, you get to know some other good people. So I will say that if I had to choose one member of the Rauscher clan, it would definitely be Noam's sister Michal, who Rachel knew from school, and I knew from school. She's amazing, but also Michal introduced me to, him in terms of specifically for this podcast. So definitely want to give a shout out to her.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you, Ari. And
no problem. But I will tell you, if we did get divorced, I would choose Michal for right now. Maybe that'll change after today. But I
appreciate that. Thank you. Well, were you saying if you and Rachel got divorced, you would choose Michal?
No, I'm saying if we got, in other words, if I had to choose a member of your family to sort of say, I'm going to take them, I'm going to take Michal.
Just in general. Okay, fine. Just in general. If there's some type of need to choose sides,
exactly.
I can appreciate that.
But hopefully not. Hopefully never.
You guys stayed at our house in Charlotte, right? Pre-divorce and everything like that. Didn't you? Were you in Charlotte for one weekend?
I don't remember specifically.
Oh, well, okay.
So I'll say that I'm sure it was a wonderful weekend.
Let's hope it was. let's hope it was, man.
Sounds good.
Like I said, Ari, it's great to have you. Before we get into this whole topic of, intermarriage and things like that, and does it lead to divorce, which I think is a very, serious question and could, potentially be really helpful for a lot of our listeners, as an alumni of Columbia, how do you feel with all this stuff going on, right? Can we just give you a couple minutes just to process that with us?
Yeah. So let's just say this. Some of you may have heard that Columbia students were taking over Hamilton Hall because Hamilton Hall was the place in which there was it was taken over, was occupied in 1969, I believe. I think that they took Hamilton Hall because that's the place where some of the faculty who have taught certain things about Israel and Palestine, that's the place where they have the keys to get in. That is to say, when I was a student there back in the early 2000s, most of my classes in the Middle East Studies department took place in Hamilton Hall, which was, it was a great opportunity to learn. The learning was very difficult. And I would say that when I was there, I felt what Van Jones from CNN sort of described as the purpose of college, which is to be in a place where I'm physically safe, but intellectually unsafe. The learning I got there really helped me develop a certain nuance to understanding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the Israeli-Arab conflict overall. That being said, it only taught me one way of looking at the conflict. It did not give me a sense that there are multiple sides and there are multiple ways of understanding the conflict. The reason why I taught a course online about the conflict is because of what's happening right now, but also because I believe that partially it was my learning at Columbia and other learning that I did elsewhere, including at JTS and in Jerusalem at Hebrew University, that I felt I was able to develop an understanding of the conflict where you've got two peoples together, and I think related back here, they can't get divorced. They can't get divorced from one another.
Right.
They can't sort of live in separate worlds, that they are interrelated because of the fact that they are in the same land. And that is an inherent an element to the conflict, is that from the Jewish point of view, it has always been a homeland, whether it was only in thought and in desire, but has always been considered to be the homeland that we should return to. And that for many Arabs and Palestinians, especially, that it was the home that their families grew up in. And in that case, you can't necessarily split them apart. Part of the challenge is, especially in thinking about the overall scope of the conflict, one of the ways in which we're thinking about it, or I should say, one of the ways in which it's been talked about, is the slogan of "from the river to the sea."
Right.
And from the Jewish point of view, the river to the sea sounds anti-Semitic. I don't think it's anti-Semitic. I think it's honest about what both sides view as central to the conflict, that this is our homeland. And what do you do when you have the whole house, right? You have the whole home that you can't actually get out of. Leron, I remember from, I think you were talking about from when you, maybe I'm wrong here, but that you got divorced right before the pandemic, or right like March 11th or so.
It finalized on March 12th, the day right before the shutdown, everything locked down.
Right. And imagine that if you are divorced from your spouse and you cannot separate, you have to leave, right? You can't leave your own home, and what that must be like. So that the conflict is one in which you have folks who cannot separate because their home is so important. Their home is so critical that they cannot leave it.
Yep.
And I think that's a part of this.
I gotta say, you did an amazing job. I think it just kind of like melding what you came to talk about with what the actual current conflict is, but it helps to really point in that direction of what does it really mean to work with people and live with people, right? Who are very different from you.
Mm-hmm. That is for sure. I mean, when we think about what are the reasons why people get divorced, or when we think about why relationships don't work, there are certain kind of catch-alls or certain kind of ideas about why it doesn't, whether it has to do with fidelity, whether it has to do with honesty, whether it has to do with relationship building. But one of the key ways is just about looking at the couple and saying, well, you know, you came from this background and you came from that background, and because you came from different backgrounds, obviously that's why. And when it comes to thinking about interfaith relationships, that interfaith relationships are viewed, I think, stereotypically as sources for division that would lead to the detriment of relationships.
Right.
So that you don't have a foundation of a shared religion or a shared culture that you could be able to hold your hat on as, here is who we are, and we're always going to fall back upon it. But because that is divided, that, you know, you spend, you know, how could you be able to do a bris and also to be able to be baptized, and like, what are you doing with the kids there? And like, it doesn't make any sense, and it's not going to work, and they just don't fit together. And all of that stuff, what that does is it puts noise out there that difference leads to division. What I think is really important, and some of the stuff that my co-host Anna Deweese, who is a wonderful Christian teacher, we started working together when I taught at the Interfaith. We both taught at the Interfaith Community of New York back when I was still in rabbinical school. That what we've sort of discovered is that difference can actually lead to coming closer together if you're open to it, if you want to discuss it. And to a certain degree, there is so much possibility out there for an interfaith couple, perhaps even more than for a Jewish couple, because we're a Jewish couple. Okay, we're both Jews. We're going to get married. We're going to have a rabbi. We're going to join a shul. We're going to do whatever. Yeah, maybe reform or conservative or whatever it might be. But if you have different faith traditions, it's like, okay, we actually have to be intentional about this. Like, what are we looking for from our wedding? What are we looking for a community? Can we really make this work? What about our families and saying that we can and cannot do it? And by virtue of having the conversation early on, it creates a foundation to be able to deal with any challenges that might come afterwards.
It's also,
I am so sorry, go ahead,
no,
Mom.
no, you please, leave it on,
I
please.
was gonna say I am so relating to what you're saying because I really struggled as a child of Israeli
Mhm.
parents, growing up in the Valley in Los Angeles. I was born and raised here. I grew up, culturally Jewish. I had a really hard time understanding who I was supposed to be with. I felt too Israeli for the American Jews,
Mm,
not Israeli enough for the Israeli men. And when I met my husband at the time, he was like me. He grew up here, Israeli parents. There was something so attractive to both of us about that made us feel like, oh my God, we have the same values. We have the same language. We celebrate the same holidays, but we also are American. We've grown up here. So we felt so alike in that sense.
mhm,
And our families and our upbringing were so different. And it
mm,
was something that we didn't really think we had to talk about. And I have to say, I think you're so right in that if it is an interfaith couple, you're setting that tone. You're talking about these big things. We just knew, oh, we want to celebrate Shabbat, we want to celebrate Hanukkah. Like we didn't really think of the conversations we had to have. But for us, his parents were a whole 10 years older than my parents.
right,
And there was so much difference in the way we were raised just by the time we were raised. Being a kid in the 70s and being a kid in the 80s is like totally different, right?
right.
And he was older than me, much older than me. So that whole dynamic of thinking that everything would be so aligned because we were two Jewish families
Mm,
really, my eyes were so open to it when my brother, his wife is not Jewish
mhm,
and her family's from Hawaii. And I remember we went to go visit her family and I was like, they are so much more like us
mm,
in their value of how they are with family and food and everything, even more so than
Mm.
this Jewish family that my in-laws, it was
yeah,
so interesting and so fascinating.
yeah, yeah. I really hear that, because I think what it does is that if it is done in the right way, obviously there are all these issues around using that language of what right way, wrong way. But when I say the right way, I mean to actually engage. What I think is
Mhm.
the wrong way is to not engage or to be so worried that it might be a cause for difference that you don't actually
Mhm.
talk about it, or that the agreement made is to not do anything about it.
Mhm.
Which, if I can, I have a story I wanted to share that I was thinking about that I think would be
Please,
helpful.
please,
And let's just put it this way. This is a story of when I fucked up as a rabbi. I'm going
let's
to
hear it.
start with there. So, I've always been very interested in the work related to interfaith families, though I do not have interfaith families um, for my own,
Neither do
growing up
we.
in my own family.
We talked
Actually,
about that.
I just attended my first family's interfaith wedding of a cousin in Pittsburgh, and it was really fascinating. Could talk about that another time.
Yeah.
But this particular situation was you had a Jewish husband, and he was recently remarried to a woman. They had a child, and he decided to have a conversion for their daughter. Okay. Now, the reason why he needed to have a conversion for the daughter is because he wanted to, quote unquote, do it the right way,
Mm.
which, if you look at it from a halachic point of view, according to Jewish law, that the child of the Jewish mother is considered to be Jewish, child of the Jewish father is not considered to be Jewish, which, by the way, I think that creates a whole lot of issues, especially in thinking about matters of family coming together. And I think that we need to change that, but that's a separate thing.
Another podcast.
I
Maybe
agree.
for the Federation Jewish Men's Club,
There you
another
go.
point in time. So, okay. So they wanted to do it the right way. And as a conservative rabbi of a conservative shul, I said, of course. So let's engage in it and talking about their family structure. So this was not his first marriage. He was previously married and they divorced. And he has I think three children, older children, with his previous spouse. Now, it seemed that there are a lot of issues surrounding it. And I think that one of the things I want, especially your listeners, to know is to say, I'm not saying at all that interfaith relationships are an inoculation against divorce.
Mm.
Like, same way as Jewish relationships are not an inoculation against divorce or one way or the other. I also think that language is very challenging and problematic overall. That being said, it definitely seemed in the counseling that one of the major issues that came up was that the deal that he made with his first wife was that they were not going to raise their children with any faith, with any religion whatsoever. They were just not going to do it because they didn't want to create any friction. Well, they have kids, and she starts taking them to church. Mm-hmm. She starts involving them in a religious lifestyle, and very clear from the counseling that one of the main issues that they faced had to do with the fact that that she was doing something that they did not agree to.
Right.
Now, she probably did that because when you have kids and you think about building a family, you start to then think about some of this stuff around your religion, your upbringing. What is it, the values you want to try to bring forward? So I don't fault her at all for wanting to be able to do that. But the fact of the matter is that when they got together, they were not having the conversation about what kind of way of bringing faith could work. So they end up getting divorced. He married somebody who also was not Jewish, same faith tradition. She was Catholic. And as opposed to the first marriage, he said, okay, I want from the outset to say, like, it's important for me to have this kid be raised up in a Jewish lifestyle. And so wanted to do it the quote unquote right way, have a specific conversion. And the wife was very supportive of that. So all really good stuff. Mm. Now, the challenging thing is, and I'm curious about this in thinking of couples who have families from a first marriage and then enter a second marriage, and then the family units kind of coming together, what the language is around that. Because what was also clear was only this other child was going to be converted. The other children from the husband, but from the previous marriage, they were not. It would not be appropriate to be able to do so. I did the conversion. I then tried as part of the ceremony to talk about it in a way of saying, okay, you're having a Jewish child and then siblings who are not Jewish, but it's kind of the same situation. And how is this working all together? And I used the term that working in how to try to blend the family together. Well, let's just say I got a very, very nasty email saying, we are trying to say that we are not a blended family, we're a family. And that by virtue of introducing another religion that one of the children is being converted into, the other children were feeling like, what, are we not good enough anymore? And so by virtue of my fuck up was basically saying, not counseling the family at the beginning and saying, what about the kids who are coming into this? Like, you are trying to do what's right about bringing your tradition in, and you have other family members who are also coming from a different place. And how am I, as a rabbi, trying to help you make all of this work? And what I only did was I was solely focused on the husband with their child who they decided to convert. And as best as I could to touch a little bit on some of the other issues, but didn't engage in it. And my challenge was that let's just say that they did not engage, and I don't think they ever talked to me ever again from that moment, because what I basically said to them is like, yeah, your family is now this mixed up bag and you don't really know how to do with it, and that's it.
Someone once said, when a rabbi speaks, it lasts forever, that sort of thing. And that might be a bit of an egotistical thing to say, but you say the wrong thing to the wrong person, and it really does.
Yeah, it totally is, because you're a representative of a tradition. You're representative of a kind of an authority. And especially in thinking about religious traditions look down upon divorce. Yeah. They see it as that failure. Right. And I know that that's been something kind of brought up here. Is divorce a failure? Is it not a failure? And when it comes to the issue of, it may be a failure in the sense of this relationship did not work, but it may be an aspect of growth into something else, into whatever it is you might be able to become. And that in many ways, the marriage was something that should not be engaged in. And in thinking just about, let's take one example, I think, which is the Jewish version of a divorce through a get.
Mhm.
First, the idea of a get having to be given one by the male to the female, as if to say only the male can be the one to decide, because it's a relic of that time when men were able to have as many wives as they want. Women did not have agency in it. That's changed to some degree in certain denominations. Um, and still, it is still predominantly from the male point of view of the one who actually has to give the get. But the most fascinating thing I think about the get is that it's a very beautiful and kind of strange looking document that is designed as a way to be written in a very specific fashion and has to be both written and then given in a very specific fashion for the explicit purpose of giving the couple every possible chance to not get divorced. It's like a way of saying, yes, you're divorced, but really,
Are you sure
do
you want to do this?
Are you
Right.
sure? Like, and just thinking about that from like a choice architecture point of view. Right. It's exactly. It's like, oh, are you crazy?
Even
Like,
the get, even you get you even get Jewish
you
guilt
get the
from your
guilt from the
get.
get. You should title this be like a gets guilt, like
Smeared
that sort
on
of thing.
there.
Like it's and we put so much pressure on it. And then to think about the interfaith relationships, just for a quick second on this, none of these rituals, whether it's about marriage or get, they all disappear when it comes to interfaith relationships. It's as if it doesn't count. There's no marriage. There's no need for a Jewish divorce when it comes to interfaith relationships. It's as if the rabbis are saying that's just for the side. That's not real. And so let's not even think about that. Let's just sort of put that to the side. And here you have a tradition that is absolutely beautiful, love it, and yet saying you have to stay married no matter what, and is saying that these other relationships, which could be beautiful and could help you actually be able to be connected with each other better, those relationships don't count.
It's interesting too, you're bringing up a lot. Let's also be clear that part of the foundation for this conversation that we're having is the conversation that you had on your podcast, the fourth episode, which has
Yeah.
primarily been, a discussion of the myths related towards intermarriage, or at least the myths that are
Right.
communicated within our community about intermarriage, right? How
Right.
one of them will certainly be, well, you'll just get a divorce because you can't possibly make it work.
Right.
And that's interesting in and of itself. The idea that differences lead to well, divorce, but also, as we were saying, disconnection, right? And also separation between people, or division, as you were saying. That's a much better way of saying it. Disagreement leads to division, right? That's antithetical to our tradition because we know it's not true, right? That's the whole point of the root to study. And one of the best examples we have in it from the Talmud is Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, who start out as being diametrically opposed to one another, right? One is really ugly, and one is really beautiful. One is a great thief, and the other one is a great rabbi. And so yet they come together, to study together and learn together over their differences, which is the whole point of the Chavruta story, according to Rabbi Yochanan, right? Which is that you're supposed to be pushed by someone who disagrees with you, not by someone who just agrees with you all the time, and how you can become more than friends, but in their specific example, family with one another. They marry into each other's families because of it, right? And yet it's a cautionary tale because the slight differences that do come up, right, and the way they start jabbing at each other as a result, rather than teaching each other, right, ends up causing the relationship to fail and them both to one to die and the other to go crazy, right? And so the idea that like our differences would actually push us further apart than bring us together is antithetical to the Jewish tradition. There's also this other, like a sub myth that I'm just realizing now, one that is like being in an interfaith marriage will perpetuate a divorce. Inherently, that also suggests, though, that being in a endogamous marriage, right, Jew marrying Jew, right, that your marriage will inevitably and just be successful because you've married a Jew. There's a real myth in that too, right? Maybe myth 4A, whatever you want to call it,
Right.
right? But it inherently suggests that Jewish marriages are the ones that work and last, and just because you marry someone Jewish, you will inherently have a successful marriage. And we know that not to be true either.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
I'll say as an observer, I was I was a director of an early childhood center. I ran a preschool for 10 years at a temple, right? At a Jewish preschool. And we were open to the community, and we had a huge, I mean, half, if not close to it, were not Jewish at all in our school. We had a lot of interfaith families. And one of the reasons was because at other synagogues, you had to be a member in order to be at the preschool. And at ours, we had a different format of every family with at least one Jewish parent is given the gift of membership. So
Right.
we kind of did it the other way. So anyways, a lot of the interfaith families that I sat with, it was just so interesting, the observations, because they were the ones that came in. They had so many questions. They were thinking about Bnei Mitzvah. They were thinking about what their Jewish life would be like, so much more, I would say, than the Jewish families. And it was just an interesting observation. And I did find that a lot of the interfaith couples, the partner who was not Jewish was Catholic. That was like the
Right.
more
The more common.
popular, the more common, and their
Yeah.
whole thing was kind of like, I grew up with rules. I grew up, and it turned
I'm
them
good with
off
it.
so much that they
Right.
married a Jew and they're putting their kid in Jewish preschool. But no, it was just so. I loved working with the interfaith couples
Yeah.
because they were wanting to learn along with their kids and they were so interested. And I felt like some of the Jewish couples took a lot of what we were doing for granted.
Oh, for sure.
So I really enjoyed, and I was always interested, I was going through my divorce while I was working there. So I definitely went through a phase of like being cynical of everybody, watching these
Yeah.
couples and parent teacher conferences being like,
I
are
don't
they
want to
going
hear
to
about
stay
your
together? Are they
happiness.
not? Like, what's going on over here?
Right.
And I saw a strength in the interfaith couples in their relationships, just as an observation.
Yeah.
And here I am divorcing my Jewish, husband.
Right.
And a lot of the issues that we had in our couple that I know happens to a lot of couples when you say differences, it's the families. You think it's a benefit.
Right.
We would do our holidays and both our families were to get together. They'd all want us. And now when they were divorced, it's so complicated because everybody wants us and we have to share. And I'm like, man, it would be easier if one of us wasn't Jewish.
My favorite
If we
is
just
when,
got them for all the holidays.
right. My favorite is when we're talking about my parents and my wife Rachel says, Ima and Abba, because that's how we refer to them. And then when there's something that let's say she's like, oh, I'm not so happy about, she's like, you know what your mother said to me? Right. It's like that kind of language where family can be amazing and family can also be very challenging, especially about what it means to enter into a new family and have a new way of doing things that we never knew growing up. And that actually leads to one of my favorite and both powerful and challenging stories related to this overall kind of topic. And it had to do with a couple. So it was earlier on in my career, Jewish and Catholic couple, again. I knew them after they got married. They decided to get married in a joint ceremony and try to incorporate both into their lives. But it was a very challenging thing. Her family, and she grew up Catholic, was much more challenged by it than his family. His family, the Jewish, both him as an individual Jew and also his family was much more welcoming to her. And when I got there, one of the main things that I said was we have to not just show respect, but we should encourage folks to be able to engage deeply with both sides of their family and both sides of their faith tradition so that they can feel welcomed wherever they are and whatever they bring, and that's a part of who they are. It helped them come to some of our sessions that I did together with an Episcopalian minister to kind of really reflect back the needs of the couples that I was speaking with. And what it also did was, I think, helped this individual realize that one of the biggest issues that she faced, and in fact, one of the main reasons why she engaged more deeply in wanting to make it both and bringing in her Catholic side, is because she did not want to rupture her relationship with her family until she realized that her family was toxic. And when she realized that she felt much more comfortable in a Jewish setting, when she felt much more comfortable in a way of saying, like, here's this new identity that I'm just starting to get to know through my spouse and through, his connection, and now I'm feeling it. That's when she started to realize that I need to separate myself from my family. And one of the main ways that I'm going to do that, because I feel my soul speaking out, was to convert. And so after their marriage, and with no pressure from her husband and no pressure from his family, she decided to convert because what she realized is that she needed to separate herself from toxic relationships. and her spouse was able to give her that space. Now, I'm sure there are many other stories out there in which that doesn't happen, in which one spouse becomes very negative, or it becomes a very challenging kind of relationship in which the family dynamics put a lot of pressure on the couple to have to hold it together. And what I would say is that, especially for clergy, because we have a certain agenda, especially I think Jewish clergy, to perpetuate the people, we forget at times about the individuals and what their needs are. And as opposed to being able to really meet folks where they are, both folks who are Jewish and their partners who are not Jewish, and to be able to pastor to them and also to bring in resources to be able to pastor to them effectively. Unless we're able to really do that, I think that we run the risk of alienating a potentially successful couple, because we are coming from a perspective of this Jewish thing has to be primary, it has to work. And it puts added pressure when, if you allow the family, if you allow the couple especially, to just be able to breathe into the challenge of that they're facing, they're smart. They're going to figure out what it is.
Well, let's
In a
also
sense, kind of divorced her family here, which was the thing that needed to happen for her.
you bring up the idea that you potentially miss an opportunity to engage a really good couple or put a good couple
Yeah.
together in that way, especially if it is for the sake of the Jewish family. And yet at the same time, I can't help but thinking, because you touched on something that we discussed previously in this podcast many episodes ago with Rabbi David Wolpe, when he was talking about his divorce and divorce within the Jewish community. I think there is going back to the brief conversation that we had about Judaism's insistence on people getting married, right? And how
Mhm.
even in the divorce process, it's, are you sure you want to turn this corner, right? Don't you really want to be married in that way?
Come
Right?
on,
It
there's
would
got to be a
seem,
reason. You can make it work. You can. Ridiculous.
sound like a used car salesman,
Seriously.
but it really does. This
It's
is,
what the get kind of feels like at times.
No,
but
it's like if you finally got to the point where you're ready for a get, you've done the work. You really don't need more
right,
guilt at that point. Come
right,
on
Yeah.
now.
just
Yeah,
go.
seriously.
But in Judaism's insistence on people's need to get married, it feels like that the only way to perpetuate Judaism, or at least the highest potential in Judaism, is reached when someone creates a family, or at least, right, that the central focus of Judaism is the perpetuation of the Jewish family. And I would think that's actually inaccurate. Like, that doesn't make sense,
Mm,
because it assumes that people have to get married and people have to have children. And we know along the way there are any number of reasons why people,
right.
legitimate reasons why people don't do that. Right.
Right.
And so it would seem to me that a more accurate view, or at least centralizing factor of Judaism, would be the individual being able to reach their highest potential through adherence in the religion and activity and participation and all that stuff,
Yeah.
and not the idea of the perpetuation of the Jewish family. Rabbi
Right.
Wolpe's answer was that, well, Judaism has always been counterculture, and it's not about the individual and what they're capable
Mm,
of, right? This is about a tradition and passing on ancestry and all that stuff, and a people as well. And so
right.
he's even kind of taking it out of the context of the family. Like, this ain't got nothing to do with your family, buddy. This is about the people in general. Who are you, this schmuck who's an individual,
Right.
right? Like, what do you like? We don't really care about that. And so that it's divorce, right, in and of itself it helps you see people differently, right?
Hmm.
Whether that's your ex or the people that you have in your relationships, the friends that were there for you or weren't there
Hmm.
for you if you went
Right.
through a divorce, right? Things like that. But then also, culturally speaking, what it really means to step outside that framework of a marriage, right? And a
Hmm.
Mhm.
family. You do
Right.
feel like it's a
Mm,
failure and like you've broken the fabric of the tradition, right? The thing that holds it all together.
yeah.
And when you get past that and realize, no, that's not the case, and my individual life really does matter more so than everything else, which I think, by the way, is a complete switching of just generational mindset as to why people stayed in marriages as opposed to divorce, right? That
Mm,
this family is what's important, so I'll sacrifice my needs. Whereas now it's much more acceptable for people to say, I'm sorry, my needs are much more important than keeping this family together and us all suffering. And if it
right.
leads to my health, right, that will also transmit to my family's health as well, right? And so if
Right.
divorce
Mhm.
allows me to do that, then I will make that decision on behalf of myself rather than not make that decision on behalf of my family.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so divorce also points to that cultural shift, or at least the way it feels when you get divorced in that way, and how so much pressure is on
Mm,
getting married within the Jewish tradition. And we also
agreed.
talked about it on this show in terms of, is there really a need to get married again?
Mm,
Right? And what does that look like from a dating perspective? And now, since you're part of this conversation, Ari, there's also this question of, how do you make it work if you are dating in divorce, right? And meet someone who's not Jewish, right?
yeah.
How important it is to meet someone who's Jewish or not for that matter. But what if you do have young kids involved in that? And how do you end up making that work as well?
Yeah.
I guess what I'm
I
trying to
think
say is a fascinating conversation, but I also am curious to know from your perspective, right? Since there does seem to be so much pressure in our faith and in our culture in itself to get married. What then
Mm.
really is the focus of Judaism? Is it perpetuation of the family, or is it about the individual?
Um, I think those are really, really deep and penetrating questions. So I'm gonna try to answer a little bit. Before I do that, Leron, was there something else you wanted to share
no, go
beforehand?
ahead.
Okay. So the first thing is what popped into my head, Noam, as you were going, as you were going through that, and I love your soapbox.
Thank you.
Um, the is this notion of the ger yatom ve'almana. So throughout biblical literature, especially, we talk about how God is supposed to help those who are less fortunate than others. And the categories are the ger, the convert or the stranger, the yatom, the orphan, and the almana, the widow. It
Mm.
doesn't include the grusha. It does not include the divorcee.
Oh,
And in
wow.
fact,
Damn, that's
the
good.
divorcee is considered to be less valuable. They are worth
Oh,
less in their next ketubah. That if they're no longer able to marry a
that's right.
priest, that they're no longer able to enjoy some of the fruits. So for sure, just even in those rules, I think are found the Torah of you better stay married, otherwise you're going to be, in
Worthless.
up Schitt's Creek, basically.
Right.
Um, Okay,
That's
so that's
fucked
one
up.
thing.
Wow. So
So
good to have a real rabbi on this show for once. Oh my
So
God.
fucked up,
So good.
man.
so the other thing I would say is I'm going to get a little esoteric here, but I promise to bring it back. Okay, and it has to do with mechaye hametim, or life after death. So there is a debate in the Talmud, specifically around whether or not there is such a thing as life after death, but particularly does it come from Torah or not? And the reason why they even have to ask the question, of which they're saying, duh, of course there's life after death from Torah. And if you don't believe so, you lose your possession of life after death, of being a part of Olam Haba, of the next world. Okay, fine. So, but why are they even asking the question? Because guess what? There is no mention of life after death. There's no soul in Torah. The word nefesh, which literally means in a modern Hebrew parlance as soul, means a body, means a person. And so there is no understanding of an individual. The text that actually that seem to speak to the notion of olam haba appear in much later prophetic texts. I forget the one offhand, but that it speaks about how they are going to be perpetuated, not in their soul being able to exist afterwards, but in their family. You continue to live through your family. So, to the point that you're raising here about family
Right.
and Jewish people
Right.
and individual, what I would argue is that if we actually take a look at all of this together, it's that Judaism or Israelite religion started from a place of saying that you as a person live in this world, but you're part of a larger framework, and that you will be able to perpetuate further as an individual through creating a family that will continue your name. Doesn't mean you have a last name, but it means you are Ben this, you are Bat this. That's why there's no last names in Hebrew. You just have, you are the son or daughter of the previous generation. And by the way, speaking to something said before, according to certain traditions, you're only of your father and not of your mother when you're called up there. So it's the notion of that there's a particular line, right? And especially thinking about dads and how dads feel like I need to have a son, which has been a part of major cultural, major, just many different cultures around that you must have a son to perpetuate the name of the family. And if you don't, then it's as if you've died. So there is this conflation between family and an individual, whereby life after death is really seen as being able to continue with the family. That's then extended, I think, over time to the larger sense of the people.
Sure.
But what, Noam, you're talking about here is about a sense of the individual post-emancipation in a modern sense, to say that we have individual souls and we need to be taken care of, because of the fact that if we are not happy, we're going to perpetuate a certain attitude, a certain way of being that isn't good in the future. I can't tell you, actually, one particular couple who I'm going to be marrying, in which they said they don't want to have children. They don't want to have children because both of them realize they don't feel like being parents is going to be beneficial either for them or for the world at large. They want to be able to live their best lives, and they're going to be able to not just do more, but to be more in a relationship and in a couplehood that doesn't have kids. And that is a thing that I think is a very different way of understanding what marriage, what relationships look like, if we're talking about it from the perspective of not having children. Which, to bring it all kind of full circle, even in ancient Talmudic texts, there is an understanding that you could enter into an interfaith relationship as long as you do not have any children, because you yourself will be fine in terms of your own faith. You're not going to change who you are. They're worried about the children. So theoretically, if you don't have any children, it should be more okay, again, from this ancient perspective, which is why you might find a lot of rabbis who say, if, Ruth and David, who are 75, and they just want to get married because they want to have somebody who's always there for them. They're not going to have any children. I'm happy to do their wedding, even though one is not Jewish or not. Of course, I picked two people who have Jewish names, but just in my own head. So there's all of that associated with, yes, the pressure of having children, of perpetuating the people, but it sometimes we have to realize that in many ways, it is about the success of the individual and the ability of the individual to live their best lives that allows families to grow, that allows people, a larger people, to grow. And for some folks, that may not be in the cards, or that may not be what they want to do.
Right.
So at the end of the day, as you're working with all of these interfaith couples,
yeah,
what's your take on it? Do you feel that there is more of a chance of divorce between interfaith couples, or more of a chance of divorce in Jewish couples? I know obviously everything is different depending on the person and the situation, but kind of
just in terms of for those things. Here's what I will say. I think that there is more of an opportunity as a rabbi and as a clergy person to help a family build the strong building blocks of good communication skills around key issues that are going to benefit their relationship in an interfaith setting more than a single faith setting. And the reason I say that is because it is a natural conversation to have with clergy about how are we going to make this work in an interfaith setting than it is in a Jewish or single faith setting. Meaning it's very easy for a rabbi and for a minister to kind of fall into the ease of saying, okay, this is what you can do. Here's a choice of how to make Judaism come alive in your life. It's very helpful for you as a family. And they can say, great, and that's wonderful. And they can say all the nice things, but it may not be, it's something that doesn't have to be a conversation where there's the potential for conflict. Because I think, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. I sometimes hear couples when I'm interviewing them and talking to them about their marriage, and they say, oh, we never fight. And I'm like, really?
Right. That's baloney.
Like,
no relationship goes, yeah.
Yes. Like, I think that the success of a marriage is knowing when to fight and knowing when not to fight.
Right.
And
maybe they just don't fight in a mean way.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Their fights
More
feel
discussion.
like more, their fights feel like more like disagreements or differences of
Okay.
opinion, but maybe their idea of fight is like mean,
Oh,
and
Yelling
maybe
at
interesting.
they're
each
not
other. Yeah.
getting mean.
Hmm.
Because like I can literally say, I don't really remember seeing my parents fight. When I
Hmm.
was struggling in my marriage and we fought hard and it wasn't nice and the words were not nice,
Hmm.
I was like, this is foreign to me. I never saw this growing up. And I would talk to my parents as an adult going through divorce to be like, were you guys really as in love and happy as you made it out to be? Were you lying to me? Were you just hiding it from us? And they
Mm.
didn't say we don't fight, but they said we didn't always agree on things, but we were always respectful to each other. We never wanted to hurt each other's feelings or be mean to each other. So to me, as a child, it was like my parents didn't fight.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
in comparison, when I was and my ex's he did see parents who fought. So when I would get scared from the fighting and immediately
Mm.
think this isn't right, he'd be like, couples fight. You just don't know. Like what your parents have isn't
Interesting.
real. That's like a fantasy. Like this is what happens. Couples fight. But it was about what fighting looked like and felt like. There's
That's interesting.
productive fighting that
Right.
actually has a time of making up. I was like, how is this? We never had makeup sex. Isn't that like the
Right.
benefit of fighting?
Right.
Like the fighting just made us
They made it worse.
angrier and
Yeah.
angrier with each fight. There was never an end, right? So if you can fight or argue productively and respectfully, it's healthy to your relationship. So to say, yeah, every couple fights, it's about what does fighting actually look like or
That's
sound
really
like?
fascinating. Yeah, and I think that's I now have a sort of a better understanding of that, and it might be in terms of for the couples that
Did
I've
I
met.
teach the rabbi something?
Of course, I mean,
Not the
right.
first time.
Ezehu chacham halomed mikol adam. Like you have to teach. Everyone teaches and learns from everyone.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that I think it's a beautiful way of saying it. Fighting is perhaps not about what you say, but how you say it and the way in which you're trying to communicate an idea. And what I would say is that it comes back to the notion of ezer kenegdo or ezer kenegda in regards to what it means for a couple to exist. That ezer is a help, kenegdo means against or standing in opposite. So that part of what it means to be in a healthy relationship is to help the other figure out what is it that we need or may be lacking or struggling with. And sometimes that comes out in certain ways. So it doesn't necessarily mean it has to come out as a like that kind of a fight. But the point I'm trying to raise here, which I don't think disagrees with what you're saying in regards to how someone has a disagreement, is that if everything is fine, or I should say, if whatever you do, that's fine with me. If everything that I do, that's fine with them. What happens when it's not? And is there a relationship in which everything is going to be totally fine, or when we just don't want to engage? And the argument that I would make is that while it is not true across the board, and granted, if you have a conservative Jew marrying a Reformed Jew, then you've got certain challenges in terms of understanding how holidays are going to run. Obviously, with intra-faith relationships, sometimes they feel like interfaith relationships, especially Christianity, thinking about Catholics marrying Protestants and so on and so forth. So that is to say that the the issue is less about the identity of the individual and more about creating the right framework for that couple to be able to figure out how can I help my partner when there's something that there's a potential conflict between us or when we have a difference of
Mhm.
opinion. And all that I would argue is that I can help locate some of those things maybe a little bit more naturally in an interfaith context than an intra-faith context.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
I think it's also it's so much easier to see the differences and how, because at the end of the day, we all take what we were raised with, right? And the homes we were raised in
Right.
and the models that we've had. And I've
Right.
heard a lot of stereotypical comments working at a shul, right? Among the
Mm-hmm.
women of like, oh, she didn't bring anything to the party. Well, she didn't grow up in a Jewish home. She didn't know better.
Yes.
Things like that
Yep.
that are so stereotypical
Mm-hmm.
that I can see really causing a lot of drama in a family.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and look, I think that there is something there, meaning that because we're part of these family systems, sometimes it's not just up to us.
Mhm.
I mean, especially if we think about the ways in which religions have brought couples together, like thinking about the Fiddler on the Roof vision of I'm the father, I get to choose the spouse for my daughter. Well, Seitel's his eldest saying, no, I want to choose my own spouse. And that was a major change. I'm reading right now a book called Threading My Prayer Rug by Sabiha Rehman, and it's about a Bengali family. No, I'm sorry, Pakistani family or Pakistani woman, and it starts out with how she became married to her husband, and it goes through the entire, um, just the entire process, which is primarily about families meeting each other and seeing, is this person going to be the right one? Is this person going to fit with what is it that we are looking for as a family? And if even in thinking about in modern in Orthodox Jewish families, especially in more religious neighborhoods, that on a shidduch date, when you get set up with someone, you don't go for, don't look for that physical attraction really at first. You're kind of looking for, okay, what kind of a person is this? Is this going to be a good father, a good mother? And asking those kind of questions. Are we that fit in terms of that family unit? And those are definitely questions that help a family be able to move forward and being able to grow um, that that relationship. And at the same time, if you're kind of being pushed into it, it may be hard to necessarily know that you are, which is why, regardless if it's interfaith, intrafaith, regardless if it's very religious or not religious, it's about being open with yourself and really knowing who you are and your partner, knowing who they are, and being willing to say, we may not always see eye to eye, but we're willing to figure it out together. We're willing to talk with each other. We're willing to disagree with each other respectfully. And that's how we're going to make it work. And perhaps that's what, Leon, you're meaning in terms of there was no fighting. There was that kind of respectful engagement.
Thinking about how young people get married, and by that I mean their actual age, particularly in the Jewish community. I think you and I, all three of us, probably know people that got married straight out of college or even right before they left
That was
college.
me.
Right. Okay. Right.
Michal was the very involved because she was rooming with Rachel in their 5th year in terms of like helping up with the engagement. So absolutely, very,
And I
very
think
young.
Michal was married, I think, her year out of college,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
You know, and how much you don't know about yourself and your partner really at that
Mm.
time, right? And thinking about there's got to be interfaith couples who are in relatively the same boat, who are, engaged shortly out of college, right? And getting married shortly out of college, and how much they don't know about themselves, and maybe even idealistically how they think that like, oh yeah, we'll be able to make it work, right? Even though we're from two different backgrounds and two different faiths.
Right.
That's got to be a factor in some of the reasons why people end up getting divorced, is that you really just don't know who you are, or have a better sense of who you are until like 20, 10, 12, 15 years later.
I think becoming parents, I think
That
that
also
makes a big
changes you a
shift.
lot.
I know that there were
Yeah.
things that maybe I didn't really think were important to me, or when it was just single me at 25, I didn't
Right.
really
Right.
know how much I cared about things until I became a mother, until every decision affected my child. That's when things shifted, especially for me. And so the things that I thought I needed in a person or thought weren't important for me in a person at 25, you're not able to think, you don't know who your future self is going to be as a parent.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people forget, and this was something that I always was so interested in when I was working with these families, is that, whatever woman you were, whatever triggers you had, whatever insecurities you had as a man or a woman before you became a parent, don't immediately disappear when you become a parent. Right?
No.
If you were a really anxious person before, it probably only is going to get elevated as a parent.
Mm-hmm.
And you have no idea how this new huge milestone and change in your life is going to affect you. And are you going to be exactly in line with how it affects your partner? And are they going to know how you're changed? And are you going to know how they're changed? I think that you're taking a risk when you get married so young and you haven't had the life experience yet, or even seen other. I mean, I was the first one to have kids in my group of friends, so I had no idea what to compare it to. My brother, being 8 years younger than me, he watched me go through picking my spouse, marriage, becoming a mother, divorce. He at one point was like, I don't think I'm doing any of it, like,
Right. It's a lot.
I think I turned him off at one point.
Sorry, you were continuing?
No, I'm good.
Noam, the point that you were saying before about marriage at a younger age and later on, the kind of how you're emphasizing how you don't really know necessarily. That's the moment in which I would argue interfaith marriages are probably more difficult than intra-faith marriages. If the couple is basically saying, oh yeah, we'll be fine. Like, we'll be fine. It's not a big deal.
Religion's not important to me.
It's not important, right?
And it might change when you have kids. Yeah.
That's the story that I was kind of sharing before. When you dismiss something as a potential issue and you don't necessarily have either the foresight or the maturity to be able to recognize, hey, you know what? Like, I'm a part of this religion. I'm a part of this people. I'm part of this family. And yeah, maybe it's not that important to me now, but it might be important to me later. So let me at least think about if it's going to be something that's important or not. And this is where I would say clergy really come in handy
100%.
and as well, where we have provided a lot of challenges by virtue of our response saying yes or no, or at least the projected response that like, oh, my rabbi's not going to do my wedding because, they don't accept it. It then turns off couples from seeking that kind of help.
Yeah.
There's certain colleagues out there who believe that we can engage in the conversation about what this wedding, what this marriage will look like without necessarily saying that we will do it. I think it's the opposite. I think that we can be able to be present and help couples figure out for themselves if it's going to work by saying we will potentially do it, by saying yes from the outset and not having this kind of requirement of certain kind of changes. I actually had another colleague who works specifically with interfaith couples in group kind of counseling sessions. And she said, and this is a story that I bring up on the podcast episode that Nomi was referring to earlier, entitled It Won't Work, that she deems it successful in terms of the work of the counseling, which happens before the marriage, if a couple engages in conversations around faith that they did not think about beforehand, but they realize is important to them now, and realize at that time that it's not going to work, that she deemed that to be a success. And I will say as well that for my own story, which I also share in that episode, that my first serious girlfriend was not Jewish. Partially was because the Jewish girl that I wanted, I think, did not want me because I was the rabbi's son. So, what can you do? There's only so much. There's only
you're
so
a
much
preacher's boy, but not a rabbi's son.
Seriously, exactly. I have a better shot then. But that relationship actually was so helpful for me because it made me realize I want to marry somebody who's Jewish. And that's okay too, right? Being able to determine for yourself, what is it that you want? What are those kind of red lines sometimes you need to go through a divorce, which I think a breakup in a certain sense is a divorce, maybe without the consequences or as many of the consequences, but it takes an emotional toll on people.
It's a separation. It's an ending of a relationship. Yeah.
Exactly. So those can be informative and inform you about who is it or what is it that you are all about, but you have to be intentional and you have to be thoughtful with it. And I mean, I think both of you would know this much more about the rate of divorce among folks who are just very not self-aware. That is, if you have individuals who are not self-aware, they tend to be much more the individual who's going to get divorced than people who are self-aware.
Oh yeah.
I wonder how many of our listeners would describe themselves as self-aware.
Well, I think just the 3 coaching clients I just met with this last week, that was the issue there was, a lack of self-awareness.
So let me ask you a question. You're sitting down with a couple that's divorcing and they're from an interfaith family, and how do you counsel them? What would you kind of say to them if they were going through that divorce, or they were already separated and they needed to figure out a way to co-parent, right? Having 2 separate faith traditions.
Right. I think that when it comes to co-parenting, Leroy, you shared this wisdom in a previous episode of that, or it may have been the guest who you had. This had to do with being a part of a community. Sarah Zelensky, I think, was the one who was the guest. That when you are not around your child because your child is with their father or their mother and not you, you have to be able to let go. You have to be able to let go of certain things, that the rules that they're going to follow are going to be different because you're not in that same space. Now, granted, there are always going to be things that you have to work on together. And I know of couples who still have a lot of difficulty when it comes to that. Frankly, I think that a lot of the difficulty comes when the kids know that the parent is bad-mouthing or treating the other one who's not there in not so nice ways. If they treated them with respect, that would be different. So in that scenario, I believe they would be more likely than not that in a divorced couple of an interfaith family, that they are going to engage in multiple faith practices in some capacity, in which the other faith individual is not around. So you'd be having Christmas dinners without having the Jewish father there. You would be having the Passover Seders without the Christian mother who's there. And so I think in that scenario, what I would be counseling on is that while they are not there and while the one faith partner has to let go, that those even holiday moments could either bring the family together or tear them further apart. And to just be very aware of what they're doing that could negatively impact their kids, especially when they go back and live with their ex.
And that matters as being ready for it or not being ready for it, right? You could think like it would be great to spend Passover together this year, and neither one of you are really at a place for it, and it ends up becoming worse because they're there as opposed to not. But then to your point, when you are ready to do it, it's probably a good idea to do it because it's an opportunity for the families to come together.
And it could also be something to say like Passover Seders sometimes happen over spring break. And then one parent's like, I want to take my kid to Italy for spring break.
Right.
And you're like, but I want them to be a Passover Seder. And then it's like, not only do you have the issue of vacation time and where they're spending it, but then you have the issue of this is an important family celebration that we would be spending it together if we were still together. And there are a lot of those other issues surrounding it.
Ari, I want to push you just a little bit more. I appreciate the idea of letting go, right? And just kind of accepting that your kids are going to be following different rules. Frankly, that's true whether or not you're married in an interfaith family, right? They will grow up and develop their own set of rules to follow, right? Or find someone else's rules. In any event, though, look, when my ex got remarried, there was this feeling I had of relief in some way, knowing that the guy was Jewish. And I realized that I also had a visceral fear of if the guy wasn't Jewish, right, what then would they be getting in the household? Right. And so
my kids do Christmas now.
Okay. So, this is part of the visceral reaction I'm talking about, in the sense that like letting go is a nice kind of introduction to it. But what do you really say to someone that helps bomb this feeling of, and I mean BALM, bomb, right?
Right.
This feeling of, I've really failed my kids, or my kids are now doing something that's completely opposite of what I've been trying to teach them with Judaism.
Mm. Okay. So, one of my favorite, uh, one of my favorite stories around topics like this comes from the blessing that Jacob, our forefather, gives to Ephraim and Manasseh, to his grandchildren. First is that Jacob is a the only Jewish grandparent to interact with his grandchildren in all of Torah. Moses does not interact with his grandchildren. Abraham does not interact with his, let alone any of the foremothers. No one. And he's interacting with his grandchildren, who are ostensibly interfaith grandchildren, because Ephraim and Manasseh are the children of Joseph, his son, and Asenat, who is Egyptian. Now, this is anachronistic because that's not exactly how it went down then, but we can also learn a lot from the Midrashim on the Jewish legends on that particular interaction. And two of those legends speak about the following. The first speaks about how when Joseph brought Ephraim and Manasseh to his grandfather, he was worried that his grandfather was not going to bless them because they were too far removed from their ancestry, from their heritage. So it was the father who was worried about his grandfather accepting his grandchildren as legitimate Israelites or legitimate Jews. And in that same midrash, it has Jacob having a similar concern, that he wonders when he comes down to Egypt, will my family be able to continue on? Will my family be able to continue to follow the traditions of our ancestors by coming down to this foreign land of Egypt and mingling together with others? So the concern about how, let's say, children are experiencing local culture or faith or tradition that concern is felt very much by our ancestors in Torah. And so the first thing is to say that the concern, Noam, that you're sensing and that you're expressing, Leon, I think I heard a little bit, is valid. It's like, is this okay? Is my child still going to receive the same blessing? That's the first thing. Second thing is that there's an interesting kind of interbiblical text explanation that looks at how Jacob says, I've only seen them for the first time. This is at the end of, I think it's chapter 48. And that earlier of Genesis, and earlier it says that Jacob had lived in Egypt for 17 years, which put together means that he sees his grandchildren for the very first time 17 years after he was already in Egypt. As if to say, there's been a very long time when he hasn't seen his grandchildren, and he has no idea how they may be thinking about Judaism, how maybe they be thinking about their connection to their heritage. Meanwhile, there's another midrash that basically says, oh, actually, they were learned Torah students, and they were brought to study together with Jacob. So they definitely had interactions with him. But if we take the idea of that they had not seen them for a long time, or that Jacob had not seen his grandchildren for a long time, and we take this idea that he wanted to be able to teach them Torah, and then we still come to the actual text itself, meaning no matter what is going on inside their heads, oi, my grandchildren, are they going to be able to continue this tradition? Oi, is my father going to see that my children are still worthy of blessing? At the end of the day, they're still blessed. And not only are they still blessed, that blessing is what all parents give to their children every Friday night. Yesimcha Elohim ke'Ephraim v'Manasseh appears in that section, that blessing that says, no matter what happens, wherever they may be, and even if we separate from them from 17 years ago, from 17 years, maybe how long it's been since the last time we interacted, they can still find blessing. They can still be blessed by us. All that is to say, the concern is valid, that very much so, we want our children to be able to receive their tradition and to be able to act on it. And we hope our ex will be responsible enough to offer a tradition that is not their own, to not badmouth us in front of them, and to be able to allow our tradition to continue to persevere even when we're not there. And even if it happens in a negative way, even if our worst fears are realized, there will always be a possibility that they will be blessed one day.
What a beautiful piece of comfort, really there to conclude our conversation. Rabbi Ari Saks, it's been wonderful seeing you again, friend. It's been
Been a
great.
pleasure.
Thank you for your generosity of time and wisdom and sharing with us. Really, truly a blessing for us in this conversation as well. What's the best way that people can get in touch with you if they have questions related
Sounds
to,
great.
interfaith families?
Thank you so much. And again, to Noam and to Liran for this opportunity to be here. It's been a pleasure. I hope that your listeners have been able to learn, and would love for you to follow the podcast. You can just simply follow by finding it on any of your podcast platforms. We are building towards a second season that is going to be launching probably sometime in the fall, winter-ish, which is around the season that we offer it. And if they want to find more, you can check out our website, interfaithingpod.com. And you can also follow us on Facebook or Instagram. And we'll be happy to message us as well. If you want to support the podcast, we have a Patreon in which we can offer personalized counseling and educational materials. That's at patreon.com/interfaithing. And we'd love to continue the conversation together.
And what's your handle on Instagram and Facebook?
It's at Interfaithing Pod. It's either at Interfaithing Pod or / or Interfaithing for Facebook. So one or the other, they'll be able to find it if they search for it.
Interfaithing. Love it.
Yes.
It was so nice to meet you.
It was nice to meet you as well. And looking forward to finding another time to connect. And I'm just thank you.
We will. Well, Ari, you've been really a wonderful source of wisdom for us. Thank you again.
My pleasure.
Absolutely. All the best to you in your journeys. May all the couples that come to you be blessed as well by your wisdom. And friends, with that in mind, you can also check us out on social media at the Jewish Divorce Project on Facebook and Instagram as well, and reach out to us at the Jewish Divorce Project at gmail.com. Take care, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
If you're interested in becoming one of our sponsors or have questions and thoughts about the podcast, please email us at thejewishdivorceproject@gmail.com.
And you can always find us on social media at the Jewish Divorce Project on Facebook and Instagram.
And if you'd like to work with me, I specialize in divorce coaching for women. I can be found at mydivorceconcierge.com and on Facebook and Instagram at mydivorceconcierge.
And if you're interested in working with me for divorce coaching or spiritual coaching, I work with people of all kinds, of all backgrounds as well. My email address is noamrauscher@gmail.com. That's NOAMRAUCHER@gmail.com. And you can also find me on Facebook and on Instagram at Noam Rauscher.